Welcome, everybody, to the Well-Informed Podcast. Today's venue, recording, look is going to be quite a little bit different from what you may be used to watching or listening to, as we're actually in a different environment. This is actually the Safer Schools Together headquarters. The studio that we have where we present all of our live sessions. And there's been a lot that has come up in the past few weeks that kind of made us, hey, let's do a kind of an impromptu session to have this conversation. Because so far on the podcast, we've had such an amazing number of guests talking about their expertise. And, you might have heard throughout some of those conversations, them talking about the work that SST does, the work that Safer Schools Together does. And in light of the tragedy at Georgia, the state of Georgia, the school killing that took place on September 4th, one of the things that you've probably seen in your communities or heard about is the number of increased social media threats that have been circulating across different platforms, on the news. And one of the big things that we hear a lot from parents and from other individuals is, number one, why is this happening? Why are we seeing a large increase in these threats? And then number two, why aren't, for example, schools getting shut down because of these threats, right? We are in kind of this heightened state of awareness right now. And what I wanted to do with this episode is actually, have myself and my colleague, Stephen MacDonald, who's one of our presenters at Safer Schools Together. We have a little bit of a conversation about what are some of the things we're seeing right now. Obviously, Stephen being able to travel along the road and, being here to talk about, what we're seeing kind of on that office side. We kind of want to peel back some of those layers of what actually is going on behind the scenes and what are some of the tools and steps that we actually have available to share, to talk about when you actually do see these types of threats that exist. So I'll put Stephen on camera as we're kind of live producing this, but yeah, good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. I've seen all the incredible different trainers that we've had on and different presenters and subject matter experts. So really excited, honored to be able to come on to the Well-Informed Podcast.
It's interesting because it's a different venue, like it's the same venue that you and I present in almost every other day, but for a different format. So it's cool to be able to kind of use this opportunity. But obviously this has come from a number of different situations, like are having to talk to news media even this morning about what's going on, and even us sending out an alert. So if anybody does subscribe to our email news alerts, we had to send one out because of one of these, what was kind of flagged as like a spam hoax threat. But I think even before we jump into what we're looking at today, we have to take a step back first and kind of understand, like, this 2 to 3 week period after a tragedy occurs is something that we refer to, and you'll hear us talk about it quite a bit, is what's called a critical period. And, it's what we kind of define it as, it's like a predictable time frame where we can see increased amounts of threat-related behavior. So this is unfortunately what we're dealing with, obviously, right now, is not something new. There's some new elements, absolutely, about the way and method that a lot of these, threats are being communicated and shared. And we kind of want to talk about some of those as well. But, realistically, this is something that we've been dealing with, since SST has basically started. I've been here for 8 years. You've been here for, you hit 5 yet?
It's 5 and just, basically 5 in the next couple of weeks.
Nice. And, the unfortunate part is that even within that time frame, there's been a number of tragedies that, we have worked on and witnessed in that aftermath. And what I mean by worked on is providing supports to maybe some of those districts or those neighboring districts for some of that support, and also on the additional front of training. And, you hear us talk about it in some of the other episodes, but the social media that was unfortunately posted prior to those events. So when we look at, again, the aftermath of those tragic events, there's a common denominator, and usually there was some social media that was shared prior to that event. We call that kind of that digital leakage front. Things that were shared publicly available that maybe, again, this is why it speaks to the importance of one of our trainings, which is the digital threat assessment training.
Absolutely.
That we want to make sure that every school behavioral threat assessment team, and even goes outside the K-12, has this understanding and knowledge of, because of, again, events like what we're dealing with here today. And whether it's been a Snapchat thread or Instagram thread that's been passed around in your community, or you've seen, again, other things that have been, shared. Stephen, you've got the really great opportunity of actually being able to travel and do all
Yeah.
the in-person sessions and talk with districts all throughout North America who are probably feeling all the same. So what's your experience been within these past few weeks? Because you've been all over.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very interesting, and it's a time where we are starting to see more and more of these types of social media threats. Of course, again, this critical period, and noticing and being able to be out there and actually communicating with a lot of individuals who are, whether it's principals, vice principals, assistant principals, we work with directors of security, law enforcement, and everybody's asking the same question. They're asking us, how do we figure out whether or not this is actually directed at our school?
Right.
That's usually how it happens.
Yeah.
Right. We have a lot of really important conversations in our trainings. There's a lot of different language that we use, but time and time again, in that moment, the question is very simple. Is this a threat? What do we do? And most importantly, is this a risk? Is this a threat to our school's safety? And I'll tell you just one that just came up the other day. And the school themselves brought this to my attention when I was there at the conference and doing this training. And they came up and they said that between their kind of 6 high schools in their county, they would have this kind of volleyball tournament, which I thought, awesome, that sounds really cool. Mm-hmm. But then someone brought forward a TikTok comment. I know TikTok's everybody's favorite social media, but in this situation, I'm just kidding. But in this situation, when they brought that forward, I could see it, and they said it in their description. They're like, this is not necessarily a credible threat. Mm-hmm. I would not really consider not going through with the volleyball tournament based on this TikTok comment, which was actually, it said, I'm going to shoot up the volleyball game, and then in parentheses it said in Minecraft. Well, this is actually something quite interesting, because Colton and myself, when I told this to Colton actually just before we came on, we both kind of sat back in our seats, because almost 2 years ago we did a whole current online behavioral trends, which is a training we do together, about all the new information our analysts are uncovering or dealing with or finding during their scans. That was a current online trend about 2 years ago, where individuals would make a threat or maybe express suicidal ideation, but then put in parentheses in Minecraft, in Roblox.
Right. So I'm going to do this certain thing to make it seem like it's some sort of threat, but then in parentheses in Grand Theft Auto or in Roblox or, that type of situation. And when you first told me that, I was like, then we feel like we covered that.
Exactly.
So as of a couple, what was it, a week ago, less than a week ago, that was something that...
This was 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
2 days ago. And it was funny because when in that situation, it's a very scary scenario. Yeah. But you could see the difficulty in trying to make the right decision, right? Because our goal is to keep our students safe. Our goal is to keep our staff safe and maintain the feelings of safety in our community. But how do we do that in this type of environment when we continue to see this pop up? I will share this image here. This is one of, I think, over 4 or 5 dozen different Snapchat, Instagram, and other social media threats that we've dealt with just in the last week or two.
Yeah, and I can say about currently right now, our team has looked at, assessed, and been a part of looking at different threat-related images, over 40 right now on different pages like Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, all these things. And what you're looking at on the screen is pretty much, commonplace for what we're seeing. It's a threat that's screenshotted, then reshared, then re-screenshotted, then reshared. And there's a lot even in posts like these that we want to be able to uncover and talk about and go through. But, as Stephen was saying, this is something that our team, again, is being bombarded with. And one of the things we really want to cover is that we've got lots of examples to showcase, threats like this that we're looking at right now. We'll go through them. But I think one of the really important pieces we need to understand and kind of work through is, number one, the language of the threat. Exactly. Like, why is that an important piece to understand, especially when we look at, let's say, somebody who is what we refer to as on the pathway to violence, right? Mm-hmm. One of the most important trainings or pieces of training we try to get folks to understand is that when you look at targeted acts of violence, again, being in the wake of the killings that happened in Georgia, any one of these high-profile incidents, is that Nobody wakes up one day and decides to commit an act of violence. There is commitment, there is evidence of planning, there is what we call rehearsal behavior, which is just simply engaging in behaviors consistent with the threat. So as an example, Stephen, you have siblings, right?
Yep, two half sisters.
I have siblings too. And, we always ask folks, and the question is that, who here has made a threat to kill somebody before? Right? And usually, people are like, no, I've never done that. And then I reframe the question as who's had siblings, right? And then It's like, oh, no, that makes sense. And one of the really important things that we understand is that we are dealing with the minority in these cases when it's the tragedies, right? It is the minority. However, there are lots of pieces of information that unfortunately slip through the cracks. And again, that digital component is one of them that we are trying our best to make sure that people have this awareness of. But one of the things when we look at these different types of threats is that the language is so important to understand. Don't come to school tomorrow is unfortunately one of the most commonplace. It's almost now taken, it is made to be a joke, even though obviously we in this world know that it's not. We're even seeing a lot of responses from different areas and states with the very, name and shame type situation of those students who are making those threats. And, we can absolutely empathize with the frustration that they may have. But again, one of the training points that we are trying to make sure is that, what is the return to school now look like now that their face has been shared everywhere? That threat assessment process looks a lot more than just, are we going to shut down the school or not based off a Snapchat threat, especially when it's an anonymous threat.
Exactly. And we want to be thinking, how do we make sure that our threat assessment process, our adherence to the law in our county, our districts, our states and provinces, how do we make sure this doesn't serve as that kind of additional risk enhancer to that student, to the overall community? In these types of situations, we don't like to use the word unfortunately because but we have to. Unfortunately, in these types of situations, they can be very fluid. We're still in very unprecedented times in this type of sense when it comes to these types of threats. It's not that we haven't had them before, but the sheer access to the internet, the sheer scope of these types of threats and where they can get to, we're seeing them cross state boundaries, national borders. They're crossing over because of the similar names of schools, districts, university, and college campuses are even facing these types of issues based on the fact, that they have similar or even matching names. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing, and one of the best proactive things we can do, is making sure that we take some of the information and knowledge that we're getting from what is occurring and taking it back to that proactive, preventative piece, making sure that we're talking to our students and talking to our parents, caregivers in the community about the fact that digital behavior has real world consequences. And we need to make sure that they understand this is not a joke. This is a situation where we've heard these conversations. Think about it. How many times, maybe in middle school, high school, did somebody make it shouldn't have been a joke, but make the joke to their group of friends, it's calling a bomb threat. I'm not ready for the midterm.
Right.
I heard it a million times. Everyone would talk about it. There would be the jokes. Some kids you could probably tell were a little bit more serious, but it was rare because you actually had to pick up the phone and try and pretend that you were making a threat.
Yeah.
In this situation, the access and the anonymity of the internet allows for this type of behavior to occur, and that's what we have to look at, the innovators versus imitators, and understand the intent when it comes to a student or a subject of concern who may engage in this very threat-related behavior, this worrisome behavior. Was the intent to cause harm? Was it intent to disrupt? Or is there more to this situation? Are we looking at that cry for help, which is so important in our threat assessment process to understand? Because we know in these types of situations, working in this every day, like you said, 8 years, 5 years, we have seen I would say countless cases, the majority of our cases, we see that cry for help. And we want to ensure that we understand the entirety of the behavioral baseline of a student, whether they are 10 or 11 years old, or they're in our university campuses at 21, 22 years old. Do we know what all the risk enhancers are? Do we understand the intent behind this behavior? And importantly, if they are evolving down that pathway to violence, how can we meet them where they're at?
Yeah.
And a lot of this comes from the digital behavioral baseline.
Yeah, and I think you hit a really important part part that we want to teach a lot is the intent behind the threat. Because again, being in this critical period, again, we know it's a predictable time frame for increased threat-related behavior. Why do we know that? Well, number one, it's from the number of years that we've seen this. And by the way, our years are nothing compared to what we have, again, our full team, who's seen this, our full team. Again, over 100 collective years of experience in this world of behavioral threat assessment.
Yeah, our founder alone, 30 plus years of behavioral threat assessment and education. My goodness.
Exactly. So it's not something new, again, that this is, in our world anyway, that's something completely brand new that we've never seen before. New elements, as I mentioned, that we'll, touch on a little bit later, but in this world of like, why all of a sudden is there this increase? Why is it a predictable time frame? Well, I mentioned the idea that, again, nobody snaps. Nobody wakes up one day, a healthy individual goes to bed and wakes up the next day and decides to commit an act of violence. There's that, again, there is that pathway. And the intent behind sharing that is extremely important, because one of the things that we've noticed is the coverage of these events. And I'm not specifically picking on this one event. And by the way, we're not using this as a platform to, name or shame or anything like that. Like we don't know any of the, well, we know some details, but again, we're not using this as a way to, they should have done this, hindsight 2020. All the things is just about learning. And one of the things we do find in the wake of tragic events is that a lot of the media coverage, a lot of the sharing and talking about the information, a lot of the past potential run-ins with law enforcement are things that are highly publicized and shared. And one of the things we do find is that this will provide what we call further justification for individuals to then reshare threats. And this is why it's so important that even though we're getting inundated with these types of anonymous Snapchat threats that are there, that we really examine each one individually, because there could be so many different reasons why somebody posted that. Again, the justification being it's a cry for help, or the other flip side being that there is somebody on that pathway to violence, and that post itself is that kind of shift in that baseline of them furthering themselves down. So why the work and the training becomes so extremely important is be able to figure out those little pieces. But to your point, a lot of them are shared digitally. Most of our threats are communicated digitally.
Oh yeah.
So if we're not understanding that, hey, how do we even know which platform we're going to go to? Because do you still have the threat up, or any of the other threats up?
I do.
I mean, we're looking at this right here, right off the bat. Like, if you're watching this, like, can you tell what social media platform this threat even came from? And that's part of the training in which we do. We're trying to get teams to understand that we are dealing with a screenshot of a screenshot of a screenshot. One of the tools that's available for law enforcement, and a lot of folks may not know this, is the law enforcement emergency portal, essentially, where law enforcement are actually able to go to Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok or Discord or wherever and submit what they call an emergency disclosure request, which social media providers can give, IP addresses, emails, phone numbers, things like that, anything that's associated to that account, to again get that relevant information, again get that search warrant for that place or even that device, depending if they know who the subject of concern is. But again, when it's combined with what we see on the screen here, like, how are you supposed to know who the original poster is?
It's nearly impossible, really.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of data we can go off, and this is where that fear kind of starts. So if we even start to pick apart this post, in of itself, like, there is a lot to look at, right? The big threat being hug your loved ones tomorrow might be the last hug you're getting. And then there's like a gun emoji, and then it looks like the books emoji, right?
No, it's actually the leaves that usually represent marijuana.
I swear, it looks like the books emoji.
I know, but if you get real, if with the more clear version of this threat, it's actually the representation of marijuana through emojis, which we're fortunate. We see these types of, fortunate seems like the wrong word, but in this situation, we do have a significant record of these types of threats and all of these online behaviors. So we actually have a good record of all the different ways these emojis are used in our interpreting emojis and coded language guide. But as well, in this situation, what do we do? Even if you could read that or couldn't read that, what do we do next? Because we know this is circulating. One of the great things and one of the big teaching points we try and put out, especially for our law enforcement and our threat assessment teams, is if you get this screenshot, even let's say you don't see a bunch of overlays and overlay. Let me pull up a different one for you for just a moment.
Yeah.
Let's say that you
unfortunately
see,
we have lots.
yes, fortunately we have a lot. Maybe you see something like this, right? And this one is actually a student who's scared. A student who took this information, was posted on September 11th of this year during the last couple of weeks. And in this case, they're saying that they're scared that there might be an individual who's going to attack the middle and high school in their area. So if this is put to your attention as a threat assessment team or as law enforcement, usually hopefully working together, multidisciplinary teams are the most effective.
Even as like a principal or a parent
Yeah.
who's seeing this, there's many different responses we can have
Yes.
something like this, right?
And it's so important that we go on the hypothesis we're the last one to see it. Because we never want to look at this as we caught it right away because of the screenshots, of the saves, of the reposts, and it is important that we understand there is a parallel process to this type of situation. There's, of course, identifying the level of risk, assessing whether or not we need to go into a lockdown, a hold and secure, if we're going to cancel class, and then going through to intervene if we're able to, if we do believe it is a credible threat. But there's also the rest of our school community and the feelings of safety. We've seen, and this one really causes a reaction for myself because I remember a case that was kind of helping out with the analyst team, and it was a TikTok that was circulating. But the TikTok was circulating all over the United States, including Canada. And when it circulated, you could go into the comment section and you could see the live comments coming in. Like in real time, students are commenting. Students are like, I'm on the bus, should I get off? I'm outside. I'm in line to get into school. Should I run away?
I'm literally going to school right now and I see this threat.
Yeah, and what a terrifying situation.
Yeah.
Especially if the school that you have in your community, that is a safe space to thousands of students. And to see that safe space get threatened is obviously going to have an impact on our youth. And so we want to make sure that our students know about their supports, about their anonymous reporting tools, of course. Because instead of commenting on a TikTok, we want them to be reaching out to you. Whether it's Erase in British Columbia, whether it's PSST World through Safer Schools Together around the rest of the globe, or you have your own anonymous reporting tools statewide, district-wide, county-wide, but making sure they know about it. Actually, I always love to do this in our DTAs, and especially when I'm in person. It's always, and it's funny, some people think, oh, he's going to shout out maybe Vancouver, because Steven's from Vancouver. But no, I'm shouting out Colorado, and specifically Silverton, Colorado. Silverton, Colorado is a ski town of 150 permanent residents in that area, something real small like that. But first of all, shout out to them, not only because of the fact that they bring us in to talk to their students every year and their parents, just about digital safety and making sure they're safe. That's incredible. For such a small district to still care so much, that's awesome. But I remember, so whenever we go to do a student session, I'm fortunate at Safer Schools Together as a trainer. I teach, obviously, in DTA. I train in basically any training we can do. But I also get to talk to students. And I always maintain that's probably one of the best ways that any of us can evoke any kind of change because they are our future. They are our greatest resource. And in this situation, I remember during the school day, I spoke to the students about being safe online. And I said, I had to go to the restroom because I was drinking so much water for the altitude. And I said, where's the staff restroom? And, it's in the office. So I go to the office, come back. Well, I go back in the evening and talk to the parents, caregivers, and, the office is locked. So I go back. I said, is there another staff restroom or a key to the office? Again, I want to use the restroom, drinking water all day. They say, the students are they're all skiing and they're not here. Just use the restroom across the hall. So I said, okay, fair enough. And I walked into that restroom, and it was like I was punched in the face by the reporting tool.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was on every wall, every door, every stall, every mirror. Everywhere you looked, there was a Safe to Tell poster with the faces of students and QR codes and ways to reach out. Number one, I thought it was incredible as an adult to warm my heart. We do see a lot of difficult information and tragedies at Safer Schools Together, but we know the work that we do, and we're very proud of it. But to go out there and see that proactive piece and seeing that the students, when they walk into a place that should be private, It should be private. It's probably private, but you never know these days with all the difficulties of the different TikTok trends that are out there.
Right.
Boy, it's a devious licks. But
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
situation, knowing the students get to see that and see that the school wants to hear from them. Imagine that feeling. I remember that feeling, but not every student has it. So I always shout them out because that is where we want them to report, whether it's through the anonymous reporting tools, trusted adults, speaking to their parents or caregivers. Because when it comes to reporting, that's going to be our best way to maintain a safe community and the feelings of safety.
Yeah.
It's going to be when we are able to get those reports, when we have to find them through these images, if you want to throw it back up, when we have to find out that our students are scared through an Instagram story, that's when we know that there are so many people being impacted, and the scope we may never truly understand. That's where we see the boundaries get crossed, and from state to state, province to province, country to country. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing is getting this information out there. And those of you who are watching this, I'm sure you are, but we're just always here to make sure that you know the most up-to-date threat related behaviors. That's why we actually send this out as well. We send this information out every single time incidents and threat related behavior like we've been seeing in the past month
Yeah.
gets sent out.
The hug your loved ones tomorrow threat, was one that we had seen in a number of different districts, in a number of different states and provinces as well. Hence kind of what prompted this response for us to reach out to a lot of our contacts. And you touched on it quite a bit, Stephen, but the amount of people that still don't know what an anonymous reporting tool is or where it exists. So I really want to take a step back and cover those, because just for some folks to know, whether you're from Canada, again, British Columbia, United States, there's different ways of reporting information. So you talked about Colorado and Safe to Tell. So Safe to Tell, for those of you who don't know, that is Colorado's statewide anonymous reporting tool for students. Again, that's what all these reporting tools are for, aimed at, is for students. So they can report content that they see online or in person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's many other states that have a statewide reporting tool. British Columbia, the state of BC here in Canada, has a province-wide anonymous reporting tool.
Yep.
If you've listened to some of the episodes, hopefully you've heard us talk about it, if it was with Carol, if it was with Tiana or Emily. We try our best to link those and share those and get the word out, because even if you are a parent listening to this, you should be able to access it and at least encourage your child or your loved one to at least understand where it is, where they can go, and even help them submit a tip themselves. So again, searching that online anonymous reporting tool, because again, one of the big pieces of the language we talk about in our trainings, and what a lot of different agencies and community partners are adopting, is the language of report, don't repost. Because again, we go back to the language of the threat that we were seeing in some of the other ones. If you just want to go back to the other threat there, Stephen. Again, when it comes to report, don't repost, we've got all these screenshots. We see the threat itself, but look at all the other comments that are being laid over top about what the heck's going on. Is this going on again? What's going on? How all this information, right? And that starts to breed that panic. That's, rightfully so. That's scariness. But one of the things that we always talk about is that school safety is not just the responsibility of our admin and our principals and our teachers and our staff. It's not just the responsibility of our parents. It's not just the responsibility of our students. It's everybody who is a part of our school community. So if we give everybody who is a part of our school community the right tools and resources to be able to talk about these things, again, especially when it comes to, hey, this is now something that law enforcement need to investigate, and they're working directly from a screenshot that they had just received rather than it going through so many different channels, that's where it becomes a little bit more complicated and convoluted. And that's where, again, we see the questions about, again, why isn't the school being shut down? Or how do you know that this is not a credible threat, right?
True.
And I think one of the things that's important to talk about is the language that's used in threats. And what makes something give us a little bit more pause than something we would obviously still respond to. No matter what, we're still responding to and assessing these threats. Absolutely. No matter what. It's not saying that we're just it's not credible and then nothing's being done. And that may be the perception perhaps, But I promise you, just work with all the schools that we work with, there was always work being done. They are working with outside community partners and agencies, like us, obviously in British Columbia, but in many other, districts that we work with. So let's talk about the actual language for a moment. And I mean, when we look at, I don't know if you have any other examples of these different types of threats, maybe.
Let's go with one that in this situation we see all too often. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. I know we have it here. But one of the things as well, just a quick shout out. Michigan just celebrated 10 years OK to Say, which is their anonymous reporting tool. I just spent a lot of time there, so I wanted to make sure I shout out theirs. But they're across multiple different states and provinces, which is incredible. And in this case, I want to actually bring up a different one. I don't think I have it in this deck, unfortunately, but it is simple. It's a simple one that we see all too often. And that one is to do with the fact that we see a lot, or a ton, excuse me, of threats that really we do see very simple, very non-specific language.
And we can throw it in post afterwards
Okay,
as well
sure.
to make it on the screen, right?
So let's take a look at this one then.
Yeah.
Which is simply, it says, don't come to school tomorrow or you gonna die.
That is a very common one. Don't come to school tomorrow.
Or you gonna die, and then he puts a little devil face at the end. You can see there. But in this case, yeah, he's got a firearm. It looks like it could be a shotgun. And we can't see his face, or their face in reality. We don't know who this is. And so there's a lot of different things. I know many of you who have worked or had any kind of experience with Safer Schools Together know you're going, Steve, we got this. Reverse image search. You're right. But what if we're talking language? What if we're talking about exactly who they're targeting, the site or the date? I want you out there, if you're sitting there, you got a pen or paper, or you want to write it down, target selection, site selection, date selection.
Yeah.
Target selection, site selection, date selection. Work with us for a second here. To be honest with each other. Don't come to school tomorrow or you gon' die. What is the date selected?
Technically, it's tomorrow.
Okay. How many tomorrows are there in a year? And I know that's a ridiculous question. Like, Steve, we knew that, but did we? In the moment where we get sat in front of that threat, where somebody puts this in front of our team and we have to make real-time decisions on whether or not we're bringing students into our school, these are the times we want you to work through these examples. So you can come back to this type of training, and you're always able to reach out to Safer Schools Together 24/7, 365. But in this situation, so let's say tomorrow, that's not specific. Because yesterday there was a tomorrow, today there's a tomorrow. It's not specific. So don't come to school tomorrow, you gonna die. Let's say, what's the site selection? What would you say the site selection is?
That would be the school.
All right, which school? See, and these are the questions we ask, and a lot of people they react the same way he and I reacted because it sounds silly, right? When you start to really break it down, we would never see this and go, oh, they just said school, whatever, throw this in the recycling bin. No. But right now we're just deciding, lockdown, hold and secure, shelter in place. Are we thinking this is a credible threat? Is somebody on their way to our school right now? And so in this case, when you look at a threat like that, no, is it the elementary school? Is it the high school? Is it the driving school? Like, it's not specific enough for our team to be able to look at this as it's targeting a certain school. And then last but not least, target selection. Who are they targeting? You gon' die. Well, are they targeting you? Are they targeting you?
Yeah.
Are they targeting me? You? Like, we could go on forever. I could get caught in a loop there.
Yeah. And it is really important because, again, it's always to look at these in hindsight and think, yes, there is not enough data to support it. Exactly. But imagine, again, you are on your own Instagram feed, you're in a parent group, you open up somebody's story and you see, again, an image to what Stephen was mentioning, don't come to school tomorrow or you gonna die. What that immediate reaction is I'm reading this in my community, somebody who's reposted this, I go to this particular school, this must mean my school. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm so worried that this is targeting what I believe is my school, I'm going to screenshot that. I'm going to reshare it to my other followers because I want all the other people to know that, hey, people at so-and-so better watch out, or don't come to school tomorrow. And what we find very frequently, and I don't know if it's still up here, but it's other examples like this where the original threat, which is pretty interesting, the original threat doesn't have a target selection, doesn't have a site selection of which school it's going to be, but it's somebody else who leaves their other comment after a screenshot thinking that, oh, this must be my school because I saw it posted in this area, or to a shared story that was in this area that somebody else had reshared. So I'm saying that, oh, because, this is my school and where I attend, or, I'm in this area, it must be targeting my school. So I'll add those at something secondary or high school, better watch out. And this is where so many things get lost in translation. Hence, the importance of reporting, not reposting. And this is, again, the language. And, some people might see, again, us talking about threats like this and others and say, well, how do you know there's not enough data there? How do you know there's not enough data? I can tell you, again, from our work and the threats that we've seen, somebody who is along that pathway to violence, there is a lot more commitment to that threat. We see these anonymous-based threats very frequently, whether it's through social media or it's through a graffiti post or anything like that. But what we find is that the lack of ownership to these posts really denotes to us a lack of commitment. And that's the biggest thing, again, when Stephen talks about intent behind the threat. If you have intent behind this, or if you are committed to carrying out that act of violence, you are going to be showing behaviors consistent with that threat. You are going to be researching other mass killers. You're going to have concerning browser history. You're going to be following and engaging with, worrisome communities online. You are going to notice, and those of us who are in the school community or in any community, you're going to notice a shift in that subject of concerns baseline in some way. And what the whole process of what we try to teach is how to put those puzzle pieces together, because in a vacuum, it's just a one-off thing. It's just a one-off post. It's just a one-off behavior. But when it's combined, to notice that, oh, they started to shift their baseline around this area. They started wearing, whatever it could be to represent XYZ, or their Instagram or TikTok post or whatever has all of a sudden morphed into something resembling the true crime community, or representing these, the Columbine killers, or whatever it could be. Yeah. Again, that denotes to us a little bit more commitment than somebody who reposts a threat online, or even creates one themselves that says, don't come to school tomorrow, and they haven't had any significant changes in their life. They haven't had any sort of shift in that baseline, or they haven't posted, or they don't have access to the means, right? And what is that? Is that, again, it's the access to the means to carry out the threat. So if they're saying, I am going, don't come to school tomorrow, and there's a photo of that, firearm that's in the back, what Stephen mentioned is, hey, we can do a reverse image search with the digital threat assessment techniques and tools. Literally just take a screenshot of that, upload it to Google Images or TinEye. And if you see that, oh, there's 10 other websites that have that exact same image, well, does that tell us that our subject of concern owns that image, or has it been shared and been passed around for multiple websites for multiple years? Again, showing us a lower level of threat to that.
Yeah, and that's really important too, is that we think about the fact that what are they filling themselves up with? What type of content really interests that subject of concern? And that really helps us understand where they are on that pathway. And that's something that we can continue to talk about. I think this is one of those where this might be a really unique opportunity for us to do this even on like a monthly basis, to talk about these random little behaviors, because TCC, I'm not talking about TC, the one we all know.
Please don't go into this rabbit hole because it's so long.
We could be here forever, but this is what I mean. TCC, what do you think of? Because we're going to talk about this another time. Mm-hmm. But this information, we have lots about it. A lot of your friends, some of your family members love TCC. Now, I'm talking, when you're talking about your friends and family, I'm talking about true crime, right?
True crime.
Who doesn't love true crime? I despise it, but only because we deal with enough true crime.
Yeah, exactly. Like those who love watching like Law and Order, Criminal Minds, or those
my mom and my dad,
those YouTube channels that are dedicated to like picking apart interviews, which actually those I actually do enjoy because it is the real
true
cases. But
what about the Tumblr true crime?
Yeah, community? Very, very different flip side from our everyday people who love watching and listening to these podcasts. The Tumblr true crime community is very, very different. And what I alluded to earlier, somebody who is, talking about these Columbine killers or dressing, similar to them or mentioning similar things, that is kind of indicative of that true crime community, which at the end of the day is a group of individuals who are fixated
Yep.
on
Mass
past
killers. Yep.
Predominantly female. However, there are lots of males in that space, in that community.
Yeah, it's interesting because we see predominantly female, but then if you flip it and you look at the version of true crime communities, I love Tumblr, but you look at it more so through the lens of just looking at looking at information regarding past killers. It's a lot of males, or those who identify as male, and so in this situation, it's almost platform contingent, right?
Yeah.
Because those of you out there, I don't mean to ruin your favorite social media, but Pinterest. We see a ton of TCC and mass killers being posted and discussed inside of Pinterest. You don't have to get rid of your Pinterest boards.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Cole. You don't have to get rid of your wedding board. But in this situation, it is so important. It is not limited to any social media. TikTok has seen such an influx of the true crime community in this sense of the mass killers and school killers. So we can't get away from this type of content necessarily, but what we can do is better understand how it can impact our districts, especially if an individual has been identified as evolving down that pathway.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to be looking at here as we continue to discuss these types of threats, but also these types of behaviors going forward.
I mean, we can jump into all these different niche communities, but at the end of the day, the word that we kind of jump back to or refer back to for that content that you mentioned is inordinate knowledge. Do they have inordinate knowledge about these particular recent tragedies, any mass tragedy, any of the killers, the types of weapons they used? All of these things are, again, that indicates to us more commitment to the threat. And I can tell you, again, and Stephen can confirm this, all the conferences that we've been to and seeing debriefs of actual tragedies, one of the things that they usually put up for the screen for everybody to see is the killer's search history.
Yep.
What is one of the most referenced tragedy to this day that we always see? Columbine, always. Every time. I mean, we can go for another whole rabbit hole episode on that. But what it means to say is that when schools are dealing with these threats, when they see these types of threats, there's kind of there's two tracks in which they can respond to. Number one, how are they going to respond to this if the threat maker is known versus if the threat maker is unknown? Right? That's what we try to teach in our sessions, and we get the message across is that no matter what, you have ways on the digital side, the social media side, to help you make that determination of level of risk, whether you know the threat maker or whether you don't. And because of, again, that critical period that we're in, the almost anonymity that you can find with being able to share some of these posts, again, acting as that justification towards being able to share this and think nothing is ever going to happen, or this is more of the cry for help aspect where you are struggling with something and this is the only way that you can see that will get the attention that you are craving or whatever it could be. So at the end of the day, we are always treating these types of threats as scary and as aggravating as they can be. They are cries for help at the end of the day. And what resources, what things can we put in place for those individuals who might be on the pathway or who might have some other things that we should explore in there, and making sure that, again, a return to school is safe. We're exploring all the different risk enhancers, protective factors within that youth's life to move them more into that positive pro-social outcome. So, I mean, this is a very scratch the surface type situation, but at least, for those of you who are listening or watching, you get a sense of there is work going on in the background, right? There is a response to these side of things. There is lots of talk and conversation about what's happening. And, hopefully, again, if this is kind of your first introduction into the Well-Informed podcast and Saver Schools Together and who we are, this can help shed some light on there is work being done in the community, especially if you are from British Columbia, where, again, we always think that these things are completely out of the realm, but a lot of the threats that we've dealt with, they've been local. So,
and that's the thing. These can come from anywhere. Unfortunately, they can come at any time. But that's what's really important about this. Again, like you said, whether it's the first time or the 100th time that you've heard our voices, seen our faces, or seen this beautiful acronym, it is important. We have a team of analysts who are prepared to assist you.
Yeah.
And it's not only if you have a case file. We say it time and time again. You want to just email us, say, you talked about reverse image search on the Well-Informed podcast, but I don't know how to do it. I'll gladly jump on a Zoom call with you. I'll jump on a Zoom call with you for half an hour, and we'll work you through it, so that you can take that back to your team. the goal here is to make sure that one day Colton and I and the rest of our team don't have a job.
Yeah, we're out of the job.
That's the golden, or not
The North Star
the North Star,
is that we don't have a job anymore.
and that would make me very happy.
Exactly.
That sounded really mean, but
But yeah, no, the better resources we can provide, the better off we're going to be. So if you're listening or watching to this, check the link dump or the description of this, because we'll link our parent guide, we'll link our emoji use guide, we'll link all the different resources for free that we've created. So I hope you get a chance to check it out. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and continue on keeping the good fight up. Again, most important thing we can say is that when you see something, say something, and rely upon those who are put in those positions of power to do something. So thanks once again, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
thank you, everyone.